Alarms do not sound the same way twice. I have heard them in drills, in minor skirmishes, in the small emergencies that fill a soldier's career. But the alarm that filled my bridge on the day Earth's last defense line broke was different. It was not loud. It was not sharp. It was a slow, rising tone, as if the ship itself did not want to admit what its sensors were seeing. I stood at the command rail of the Threnai flagship Orient Vale, watching the tactical display fill with red markers, one by one, as human ships stopped responding. Not exploded, not destroyed in the way we understood destruction. They simply went silent, their signals cutting off mid-transmission, their positions frozen on the screen, like insects caught in amber.
My name is Vex Orden.
I have commanded fleets for the Threnai Alliance for over 20 cycles, and in all that time, I had never seen an enemy fall silent the way humanity did that day. Command, this is Third Wing. We have visual on the Earth Home Fleet. They are not returning fire. The voice of my wing commander, a sharp young officer named Talus Bray, crackled over the comm with something between confusion and hope. Repeat, they are not returning fire. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the display table. 20 cycles of war had taught me to distrust silence more than sound. An enemy that stops shooting is either broken or waiting. Hold formation, I said. Do not advance. But the order came too late. Above me, on the main viewport, I watched 3 of my own carriers surge forward, eager to claim the moment that every soldier in the Alliance had been waiting generations for. The fall of Earth, the end of the long war. They met no resistance. The last human battle group, a ragged formation of 11 ships that had been our most feared and most hated enemy for as long as I could remember, drifted in low orbit around their homeworld, engines cold, weapons dark. I remember the cheering that broke out across the bridge. I remember the tears on the face of my communications officer, a woman named Iris Cade, who had lost her brother in the early years of the war, back when human weapons first showed the galaxy what humanity was capable of. I remember feeling something I had not expected to feel after 2 decades of grief and loss and fear. Relief. It did not last. Commander, I am picking up something strange from the surface, said my sensor officer, a quiet, methodical man named Doran Pell. He had served under me for 6 cycles and had never once raised a false alarm. Energy signatures across the entire eastern continent. Massive power draw. It does not match anything in our threat catalog. I turned from the celebration behind me and walked to his station. The image he showed me was a heat map of the human homeworld, glowing with dozens of enormous energy spikes, clustered underground, hidden beneath mountain ranges and ocean floors. Could it be their planetary defense grid, powering down? I asked, though I already suspected the answer was something else. Doran shook his head slowly. The pattern is wrong, Commander. Defense grids power down evenly, in sequence, from the outer perimeter, inward. This is not that. This looks like something is being built, not shut off. Before I could respond, the entire display flickered. For less than a second, every scanner on my ship, and every scanner on every ship in the fleet, according to the reports that followed within the hour, lost contact with the human homeworld entirely. When the signal returned, the energy spikes were gone. The silent human fleet remained exactly where it had been, frozen and lifeless in orbit. It would be 3 full days before High Command declared the war won. 3 days of strange, unexplained sensor ghosts along the edges of our fleet formations. 3 days of salvage teams reporting empty ships when they should have found bodies, or survivors, or something. The human vessels we boarded were hollow. Life support systems ran on minimal power. Personal quarters were stripped bare. It was as though the crews had simply walked away before the final battle even began, leaving their ships to stand as empty monuments in the sky. I raised these concerns to my superiors. I was told, gently but firmly, that grief made soldiers see shadows where none existed. I was told to celebrate. The war was over. Humanity, the species that had fought the combined might of 11 star systems to a standstill for nearly 30 years, had finally fallen. I wanted to believe it. Every soldier who had lost someone in that war wanted to believe it. My own sister had died in the 2nd year of the conflict, when a small human strike craft, no larger than a shuttle, destroyed an entire supply convoy, using tactics none of our war colleges had prepared us for. Humanity had taught the galaxy fear in a way no other species ever had, not through numbers, not through superior technology, but through sheer, relentless unpredictability. They lost battles constantly. They kept winning wars. So when the announcement came, broadcast across every channel in Alliance space, declaring the human homeworld secured and the war formally ended, I stood on my bridge and watched my crew embrace one another, laugh, weep, and for a few precious hours, I let myself believe it too. That night, alone in my quarters, I opened the final report from the surface teams. Earth's cities stood intact. Its industry stood intact. Its people, billions of them, were simply gone. Not dead, gone. Evacuated with a level of coordination and secrecy that should have been impossible for a species we had spent 30 years insisting was clever, ferocious, but ultimately limited by their own chaos and infighting. I read the report twice. Then I called my old mentor, a retired admiral named Corwin Thale, who had fought in the earliest campaigns against humanity, back when the war was still young, and the galaxy still believed it would be over within a year. "They are gone, Corwin," I told him. "Not defeated, gone. The cities are empty. Where did an entire species disappear to?" There was a long silence on the line. When Corwin finally spoke, his voice carried none of the celebration that filled the rest of the Alliance that night. "Vex," he said quietly, "I fought them for 6 years before you were even given your first command. I watched them lose every single strategic position in the Kessa sector, and still find a way to win the campaign. I have seen humans retreat before. I have never once seen them run." "Then what does this mean?" "It means," he said, and I could hear something in his voice that I had never heard from him before, not in 20 cycles of friendship, that we should be very afraid of what they are planning next. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my viewport and watched the stars, thinking about empty cities and vanished civilizations, and energy signatures that looked like something being built rather than shut down. Around me, the Alliance celebrated the end of a war that had cost us more lives than any conflict in recorded history. I could not shake the feeling that we had not won anything at all. I felt, in the pit of my stomach, that we had simply been allowed to believe we had. The following morning, my orders came through. My fleet, along with 6 others, was to begin the process of securing former human territory, cataloging abandoned outposts, and establishing new Alliance presence across what had once been the human sphere of influence. It was framed as a peacekeeping mission, a formality, the mopping up of a war already decided. I accepted the orders, as any commander would, but as my ship broke orbit around Earth for the final time, leaving behind a homeworld that felt more like a tomb than a conquest, I found myself staring at the dark, empty human fleet one last time, wondering, with a growing sense of dread, whether we had truly ended anything at all. 3 weeks passed before the first sign came that something was deeply wrong. My fleet had been assigned to a quiet border region once claimed by humanity, a scattering of mining colonies and research outposts along what had been known as the Ashfield frontier. It was unremarkable territory, valuable mostly for its mineral deposits and its position along an old trade route. Our task was simple: catalog what remained, secure any technology of value, and prepare the region for eventual Alliance settlement. For the first 10 days, everything proceeded exactly as expected. My teams moved from outpost to outpost, finding much the same thing we had found on Earth: facilities left in working order, but stripped of anything personal. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just quiet, empty rooms, as though the people who once lived there had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. It was on the 11th day that Doran Pell brought the first anomaly to my attention. "Commander, I think you should see this," he said, gesturing me over to his console. On the screen was a sensor log from one of our escort corvettes, patrolling the outer edge of the frontier. "We picked up a contact 3 hours ago. Small, fast-moving, no transponder signal. It appeared for 11 seconds, then vanished." Vanished, or moved out of range? That's the strange part, Commander. It did not move out of range. Our sensors simply lost it. One moment it was there, on a clear trajectory, and the next moment, nothing. No debris, no energy signature, no indication it had ever existed at all. I studied the log myself, running the data through 3 separate analysis systems. Each one returned the same conclusion. Whatever the Corvette had detected was real. It had mass, velocity, and a faint energy signature consistent with a small spacecraft. And then it was gone, as cleanly as if it had never been there. Could it be a sensor malfunction? I asked, though I already doubted my own question. I considered that, Doran said, but we've had 4 similar reports from other ships in the fleet over the past week. I did not bring them to you individually, because each one seemed isolated. Taken together, I believe we are looking at a pattern. I ordered a full review of every anomalous sensor reading across the fleet for the past month. What came back unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. 17 separate incidents, spread across 6 different systems, all sharing the same characteristics. Brief contact, no transponder, then complete disappearance without any trace. I brought the data to my senior staff that evening, gathered in the briefing room aboard the Orient Vale. Among them was an old friend and fellow officer, a grizzled veteran named Bram Osric, who had served in the war since its earliest days and had earned a reputation for caution bordering on paranoia. He had fought humans directly on more than one occasion, and he carried scars, both visible and otherwise, from those encounters. I have seen this before, Bram said, once I had finished presenting the data. The room fell quiet. Bram rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying. Not exactly this, but something close to it. During the Kessa campaign, before we lost the sector entirely, we started seeing ghost contacts just like these. Small, fast, unregistered. We assumed they were scouts. We were wrong. What were they? I asked. We never found out for certain. Not until it was too late. 3 weeks after the first ghost contact appeared, an entire supply convoy of ours, 40 ships strong, was destroyed in less than 6 minutes. We never even saw what hit us. By the time we reviewed the wreckage, we understood one thing clearly. Humans do not send scouts to gather information. They send scouts to test defenses, to learn patterns, and to prepare for something far larger. The room was silent. I looked around at the faces of my officers, young men and women, who had grown up during the war, but had only ever known its final years, when humanity's homeworld was under siege, and their fleets were stretched thin and desperate. They had not lived through the early campaigns, when humanity was still unknown, still capable of surprising the entire galaxy, with tactics no one had prepared for. "The war is over," said one of my younger officers, a tactical analyst named Petra Vane, though her voice carried more hope than conviction. Their fleet was destroyed. Their homeworld was secured. What could they possibly be scouting for? Bram turned to her, his expression grim. "That is exactly the question that should terrify you, Lieutenant, because I do not believe, for even a moment, that humanity's fleet was destroyed. I believe it was moved, and I do not believe their homeworld was secured. I believe it was abandoned, deliberately, as part of a plan we do not yet understand." I dismissed the meeting shortly after, my mind heavy with the weight of Bram's words. Alone in my quarters that night, I reviewed the ghost contact reports one final time, searching for any pattern that might reveal their purpose. It was well past midnight when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Each of the 17 ghost contacts, when plotted together on a single star map, formed a slow, deliberate path. Not random, not scattered. A path that traced the exact boundary of Alliance-controlled space, moving steadily, methodically, from system to system, as though something out there was quietly measuring the size and shape of the cage we believed we had built around a defeated enemy. I stared at that map for a long time, the celebration of victory feeling more distant with every passing hour. Over the following 2 weeks, the disappearances began. The first was a salvage crew, assigned to an abandoned human research station in the outer reaches of the Ashfield frontier. 6 technicians and 2 security officers, sent to catalog technology left behind in the facility's lower levels. Their last transmission was routine, a simple status update confirming they had begun their survey. When the recovery team failed to check in, 12 hours later, I sent a security detachment to investigate. They found the station exactly as it had been left, equipment untouched, doors sealed, no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, no bodies. The 8 members of the salvage crew were simply gone, as though they had never set foot on the station at all. I stood in that empty facility myself, 3 days later, walking through corridors that felt colder than the ship's environmental systems could account for. My security chief, a steady, unflappable officer named Corin Ashby, walked beside me, his weapon drawn despite the apparent emptiness of the station. "There's nothing here, Commander," he said, though his voice carried none of the confidence his words suggested. "No life signs. No residual heat signatures beyond what the station's own systems would produce. It's like they walked into this facility and simply ceased to exist." I said nothing, studying the walls of the corridor we stood in. Faint scuff marks along the floor, barely visible, suggested movement, footsteps perhaps, leading toward a maintenance shaft that descended into the station's lower levels. I gestured for Corin to follow, and together we made our way downward, deeper into the facility than our original survey teams had ever documented. What we found at the bottom of that shaft would haunt me for the rest of my career. A single chamber, roughly the size of my ship's bridge, filled with equipment I did not recognize. Consoles humming with residual power, screens displaying data streams in a language our translation system struggled to parse, and at the center of the room, a chair, positioned before the largest console, still faintly warm. "Someone was here recently," Corin said quietly, running a scanner over the chair. "Within the last few hours, based on the residual heat." I approached the console, studying the data displayed across its screens. Star charts, fleet positions, Alliance patrol routes, updated with a level of detail that should have been impossible for anyone, without direct access to our command network. My blood went cold as I recognized the layout of my own fleet's patrol schedule, displayed in perfect detail on a console left behind in an abandoned human research station. "They're watching us," I said, more to myself than to Corin. "Whoever did this, they are not scouting our territory. They are studying us, learning our patterns, our schedules, our weaknesses." Corin's expression hardened. "Commander, if humans have been monitoring our fleet movements this closely, for this long, then whatever happened to that salvage crew was not an accident." I ordered the chamber sealed, and the entire station placed under heavy guard, though some part of me suspected such precautions were meaningless against whatever force had taken my people, without leaving a single trace behind. As we made our way back to the surface, I found myself thinking of Bram's warning and of Corwin's words on that first night after Earth fell silent. We had not won the war. We had simply stopped seeing our enemy, and an enemy you cannot see is far more dangerous than one you can. That evening, I filed a formal report to High Command, detailing the ghost contacts, the missing salvage crew, and the strange chamber we had discovered beneath the research station. I requested additional resources, reinforcement patrols, and a full intelligence review of humanity's final months before their apparent surrender. The response I received 3 days later was brief, dismissive, and entirely unsatisfying. High Command acknowledged my concerns but attributed the missing crew to accident or equipment failure, and dismissed the strange console readings as remnants of human infrastructure, nothing more than old data left behind by a defeated species. I did not believe a word of it, and I suspected, from the tone of the response, that whoever had written it did not fully believe it either. But orders were orders, and my fleet remained stationed along the Ashfield frontier, continuing our survey of former human territory, as though nothing had changed. 2 weeks later, everything changed. It was Petra Vane, my young tactical analyst, who first spotted it on her sensor display, during a routine patrol along the frontier's outer boundary. A single contact, larger than any of the ghost signatures we had previously recorded, appeared at the edge of our detection range, holding position roughly 40,000 kilometers from our nearest patrol group. "Commander, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. "We have a solid contact. Definitely a vessel, definitely human design, based on the hull signature, and it is not running, it's just sitting there, watching us." I made my way to the bridge immediately, arriving to find the entire crew gathered around the tactical display, watching the single glowing marker that represented our first confirmed human vessel since the fall of Earth. "Hail them!" I ordered. Petra transmitted the standard Alliance contact protocol across every frequency we could manage, requesting identification, requesting communication, requesting any response at all. The vessel gave none. It simply held its position, close enough to observe our fleet's movements in perfect detail, far enough to remain beyond effective weapons range. For nearly an hour, we watched each other across the black emptiness of space. Two fleets, one massive and one made of a single ship, locked in a silent standoff that no one aboard my vessel fully understood. "Orders, Commander?" Corin asked, standing at my side, his hand resting on the edge of the tactical display. I studied the glowing marker on the screen, thinking of Bram's warning, of the empty chamber beneath the research station, of an entire species that had vanished without a trace, only to leave a single ship behind, watching, waiting, studying. "Do not engage," I said finally. "Maintain position. Let it watch." As if in response to my very words, the marker on the display flickered once, twice, and then vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but empty space and a silence that felt far heavier than it had before. I stood on that bridge for a long time afterward, staring at the place where the ship had been, understanding with a growing certainty that the war the galaxy believed had ended was, in truth, only just beginning. The reports that followed that first sighting spread through the Alliance faster than any official announcement could contain. Within days, similar encounters were reported across 6 different sectors, each one following the same pattern. A single human vessel would appear at the edge of a fleet's detection range, hold position for a period ranging from minutes to hours, and then vanish, without engaging, without communicating, without leaving any trace behind beyond the unsettling certainty that it had been there at all. High Command could no longer dismiss the pattern as isolated incidents or equipment malfunctions. An emergency council was convened, drawing senior officers from across the Alliance, myself included, to address what was quickly becoming known throughout the fleet as the Watcher incidents. I traveled to the council session aboard a fast transport, accompanied by Bram Osric, whose experience with humanity's early war tactics made him an invaluable voice in any discussion of their behavior. The council chamber, located aboard the Alliance flagship Solvane Crest, was filled with officers from every major fleet, each one carrying reports eerily similar to my own. Admiral Yevra Castell, the ranking officer presiding over the council, opened the session with a summary of the incidents reported thus far. 31 confirmed sightings of the same or similar human vessel, spread across territory once controlled by humanity, all sharing identical characteristics. No hostile action, no communication, only observation, patient and precise. "The pattern suggests a single vessel," Admiral Castell said, gesturing to a star map displayed at the center of the chamber, marked with 31 points of light, representing each confirmed sighting, moving with a speed and range that should be impossible for any ship we have previously encountered. "If this is accurate, we are dealing with technology far beyond anything in our current threat assessments." Or, Bram interjected, rising from his seat, "we are dealing with multiple vessels, coordinated with a level of precision that allows them to appear as a single, consistent presence. Either possibility should concern this council far more than it currently seems to." A murmur rippled through the chamber. I watched the faces of the assembled officers, many of them younger commanders, who had only recently taken their posts, their expressions carrying more confusion than fear. They had not lived through humanity's earlier campaigns. They did not yet understand what Bram and I had both come to suspect. "With respect, Admiral," said a younger officer near the front of the chamber, a fleet commander named Silas Arobe, though I do not recall his full name clearly even now. "These encounters, while unsettling, have not resulted in any casualties or hostile action. Is it not possible we are observing nothing more than a remnant human vessel, perhaps damaged, perhaps crewed by survivors seeking to avoid capture, rather than some coordinated strategic threat?" Bram's expression hardened. "Commander, I remind this council that during the Kessa campaign, we observed nearly identical behavior in the weeks preceding what became the single largest loss of Alliance life in the entire war. Ghost contacts, unexplained observation, no direct engagement. And then, without warning, an assault so precisely coordinated that our forces never had the opportunity to mount an effective defense. I would caution this council against mistaking patience for weakness." The chamber fell silent. Admiral Castell studied the star map for a long moment before speaking again. "Commander Orden," she said, turning to address me directly, "your fleet has recorded the most recent and most detailed encounter with this vessel. I am assigning your fleet primary responsibility for investigation and, if necessary, interception." You will have access to additional resources and any intelligence gathered from other sectors. Find this vessel, Commander. Determine its purpose, its origin, and its intentions, before we are forced to learn them the hard way. I accepted the assignment, though I felt the weight of it settle over me long before I left that chamber. As the council session concluded and officers began filing out, discussing the implications of what had just been decided, Bram lingered behind, waiting until the room had mostly emptied before approaching me. "You understand what you are being asked to do," he said quietly. "Find a ghost," I replied. "Find something that does not want to be found, using technology and tactics we do not yet understand, against a species that spent 30 years teaching us the limits of our own imagination." Bram nodded slowly. "I fought them for 6 years, Vex. I watched good soldiers die, because we underestimated what a handful of humans could accomplish with limited resources and unlimited determination. If this ship is what I fear it might be, a scout for something larger, then you are not simply hunting a vessel. You are standing at the edge of whatever comes next." "And what do you believe comes next?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as though looking back across decades of memory to battles I had only read about in historical archives. "I believe," he said finally, "that humanity did not fall. I believe they retreated, rebuilt, and are now testing the strength of the cage we believe we built around them. And I believe that when they are ready, when they have finished watching and learning and preparing, this galaxy is going to remember exactly why humanity was the single most feared name in the history of interstellar warfare." I returned to my fleet that evening carrying the full weight of Bram's warning and the Council's expectations. As my transport approached the Orient Vale, I found myself staring out at the vast, star-filled darkness surrounding us, wondering how many pairs of unseen eyes might be watching our approach at that very moment. Somewhere out there, a single human vessel was moving silently through territory the galaxy believed had been secured, gathering knowledge, testing patience, and preparing, I feared, for a return that none of us were truly ready to face. My orders were clear, and within 2 days, my fleet was fully committed to the search. I divided my forces into 3 coordinated groups, each assigned to patrol a different section of the frontier where previous sightings had been reported, hoping that a wider net might succeed where isolated encounters had failed. Doran Pell worked tirelessly through those first days, cross-referencing every sensor log from every sighting across the Alliance, searching for patterns that might reveal where the vessel would appear next. His conclusion, delivered to me on the 3rd day of the search, was as unsettling as it was illuminating. "Commander, I believe I understand the pattern now," he said, displaying a revised star map on the tactical table, the 31 sighting locations now connected by a series of curving lines. Each appearance correlates directly with a significant concentration of Alliance military assets. Fleet staging areas, supply depots, communication relays. This vessel is not wandering randomly through former human territory. It is deliberately observing our most critical infrastructure. "Reconnaissance," I said quietly. "Precisely, Commander. And if I am correct about the pattern, our own fleet staging area here, at the Halvern Waypoint, represents one of the largest concentrations of military resources in this entire sector. If this vessel intends to continue its survey, I believe there is a strong probability it will appear there within the next several days." I studied the map carefully, weighing the risk of committing my fleet's primary resources to a single location against the potential opportunity to finally confront the mystery that had haunted us for weeks. In the end, the decision was not difficult. We had spent too long chasing shadows across a dozen different sectors. It was time to set a trap rather than continue the pursuit. I ordered my fleet to reposition, establishing a defensive formation around the Halvern Waypoint that appeared, to any observer, like nothing more than routine patrol activity. Beneath that appearance, however, I positioned my fastest vessels in concealed formations, along likely approach vectors, ready to respond the moment our elusive visitor revealed itself. For 4 days, nothing happened. My crew grew restless, the tension of waiting wearing on nerves already stretched thin by weeks of unexplained disappearances and unsettling encounters. I began to wonder whether Doran's analysis had been mistaken, whether we had simply misread a pattern that did not truly exist. On the 5th day, everything changed. It was shortly after the beginning of the ship's night cycle, when the alarm sounded, not the slow, rising tone I remembered from the fall of Earth, but a sharp, urgent signal that brought every officer on my bridge instantly alert. "Contact!" Petra called out, her voice tight with focus. "Single vessel, human design, bearing 047, distance 18,000 kilometers. It matches the signature from previous sightings." I moved to the tactical display immediately, watching the glowing marker that represented, at long last, the elusive vessel we had spent weeks searching for. It held its position at the edge of our formation, exactly as it had in every previous encounter, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid immediate engagement. But this time, I was ready. "Concealed formations, converge," I ordered, my voice steady, despite the tension building in my chest. "Cut off all retreat vectors. I want this vessel identified and contained, not destroyed. Do you understand me? I want answers, not wreckage." Across the sector, my hidden fleet elements began moving into position, closing the distance toward the human vessel with practiced precision. For the first time since the encounters began, the ship did not immediately vanish. It held its position, as though calculating, assessing, deciding. "Commander!" Doran said, his voice carrying a note of alarm. "The vessel's energy signature is increasing rapidly. I believe it is preparing to engage its propulsion system." "Close the distance," I ordered. "Do not let it escape." What happened next unfolded faster than any of us were prepared for, faster than our tactical systems could properly track, and it would leave every officer on that bridge with a newfound understanding of exactly what kind of adversary we had chosen to hunt. The human vessel did not flee in a straight line, as our simulations had predicted for a ship attempting escape. Instead, it moved in a series of sharp, unpredictable bursts, changing direction so rapidly that 3 of my intercepting cruisers overshot their intended positions entirely, forced to execute wide, costly turns to remain in pursuit. "It's reading our formation in real time," Doran said, watching the display with a mixture of professional admiration and growing unease. "Every course correction we make, it adjusts within seconds. This is not simple evasive programming, Commander. This is active analysis." I watched the chase unfold across my tactical display, my hands clenched at my sides. Despite its evasive maneuvers, the human vessel remained boxed within the perimeter my fleet had established, unable to find a clean vector toward open space. For nearly 10 minutes, the standoff continued, my ships tightening their formation with every passing second, the human vessel weaving between them with a precision that left my crew in stunned silence. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vessel simply stopped. It held perfectly still at the center of my formation, engines powered down, weapon systems dark. My bridge fell silent, every officer watching the display, waiting for some explanation of what had just occurred. "Status report," I said quietly. "Commander, the vessel has ceased all evasive action," Petra confirmed, her voice carrying disbelief. "Engines offline. No weapons charge detected. It appears to have surrendered." I did not trust it for even a moment. Humanity had never, in 30 years of war, surrendered without cause, and I could not imagine a single ship, cornered by an entire fleet, choosing to simply stop, rather than continue fighting for its survival. And yet, as my boarding teams prepared to move toward the vessel, scanning it continuously for any sign of hostile intent, we found nothing beyond confirmation of exactly what it appeared to be. A single, small human vessel, weapons cold, life support minimal, and precisely 1 occupant aboard. I led the boarding party myself, unwilling to send my people into a situation I did not fully understand without accompanying them. The interior of the vessel was unlike anything I had encountered in 30 years of studying captured human technology. Every surface was covered in displays and consoles far more advanced than anything documented in our intelligence archives, humming with a quiet, efficient power that felt almost alive. We found the pilot seated calmly in the vessel's central chair, hands resting on the console before her, making no move toward any weapon or defensive system as my security team surrounded her. She was young, perhaps in her middle years by human standards, with short dark hair and steady, watchful eyes that studied each of us in turn with an unsettling absence of fear. "My name is Laura Whitfield," she said, before any of us had spoken a word, her voice calm and measured. "I am a communications officer of the Earth Defense Fleet. I surrender myself to your custody, Commander Ordan." The use of my name, spoken so casually by a woman I had never met, sent a cold chill through the boarding party. Corin, standing beside me with his weapon drawn, glanced at me uncertainly, clearly waiting for instruction. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "We have been watching your fleet for some time, Commander," Laura said simply. It seemed only fair that we should know something about the officer tasked with hunting us. I ordered her secured and transported back to the Orient Vale, along with every piece of data our technical teams could safely extract from the vessel before it was towed into our custody. As we made our way back to my ship, I found myself studying Laura Whitfield carefully, searching her expression for any sign of the desperation or fear I would have expected from a captured enemy combatant. I found none. She sat quietly, watching the corridors we passed through with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than concern, as though she were a visitor touring a facility rather than a prisoner facing interrogation. I began the questioning myself, in a secure briefing room aboard my flagship, accompanied by Bram, whose experience with humanity made his presence invaluable. Laura sat across the table from us, her posture relaxed, her expression giving away nothing.
Why did you surrender?
I asked, deciding to begin with the question that troubled me most. "Your vessel evaded my entire fleet for nearly 10 minutes. You could have continued attempting escape." "I could have," Laura agreed. "But my mission was already complete, Commander. I had gathered everything I came to gather. Continuing to evade your fleet would have accomplished nothing beyond delaying an inevitable outcome." "And what mission was that?" She studied me for a long moment before answering, and I had the distinct impression that she was choosing her words carefully, revealing exactly as much as she intended, and not a fraction more. "Observation," she said finally. "Your fleet strength, your patrol patterns, your response times to unexpected contact. All valuable information, Commander, and all of it now transmitted safely beyond your reach, long before your ships closed the distance around my vessel." Bram leaned forward, his expression hard. "Transmitted where? To whom?" Laura's gaze shifted to him, something almost like recognition crossing her features. "You fought in the Kessa campaign," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "I recognize the insignia. My grandfather fought there as well, Commander Osric, though I imagine you do not remember any single soldier from a battle that large." Bram's expression did not change, but I saw something tighten in his jaw at the mention of a battle that had cost so many lives on both sides. "Answer the question," I said. "Transmitted to whom?" Laura's composure remained unshaken. "To Earth, Commander, though I suspect you will not find that answer as reassuring as you might hope." "Earth is empty," I said. "We have confirmed this ourselves. Your cities stand abandoned. Your people are gone." For the first time since her capture, something shifted in Laura Whitfield's expression, a faint, knowing smile that unsettled me more than any threat could have. "Empty is a matter of perspective, Commander," she said quietly. "Earth was never truly abandoned. It was simply cleared of everything you were meant to see." I exchanged a glance with Bram, both of us recognizing the weight of what she was suggesting, even as neither of us fully understood it yet. Over the following days, I authorized an extensive review of every piece of data recovered from Laura's vessel, working alongside my technical teams to decode systems and files, far more sophisticated than anything we had previously encountered from human technology. What we uncovered, piece by piece, painted a picture that confirmed every fear Bram and Corwin had voiced since the earliest days after Earth's supposed fall. Humanity had not been defeated. They had executed a controlled withdrawal, timed with such precision that it appeared, to every sensor and every observer across the Alliance, as total collapse. Their home fleet had not been destroyed. It had been deliberately abandoned, emptied of crew, and stripped of anything of true value, left behind as a convincing symbol of surrender, while the true fleet, along with the majority of the human population, relocated to a location our intelligence had never once detected. The energy signatures Doran had identified in the earliest hours after Earth's fall, the massive underground power draws that vanished before they could be properly analyzed, had not been evidence of a defense grid powering down. They had been evidence of an evacuation on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed, an entire civilization relocating in secret, hidden beneath the very battle that convinced us we had won. I brought this information directly to Laura, hoping to confirm what our analysis suggested, though I suspected, even before I asked, that she would offer little in the way of additional detail. "Where did they go?" I asked her, during what would become our final conversation before she was transferred into the custody of Alliance Intelligence Services. Laura considered the question for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Somewhere your fleet has never mapped, Commander. Somewhere your intelligence services do not know exists. I will not tell you more than that, and I suspect, even if I did, it would not matter." "Why would it not matter?" She met my gaze directly, and for the first time since her capture, I saw something behind her calm exterior that resembled genuine sympathy, as though she pitied the position I now found myself in. "Because it is already too late to matter, Commander," she said quietly. "We have watched your fleet for weeks. We have learned your patrol patterns, your response times, the strength and disposition of your defenses across every sector we once called home. The information I transmitted before my capture will already be in the hands of our command structure. Whatever plans they have been preparing during these months of silence, they now have everything they need to execute them." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest, the same feeling I had experienced standing before that empty console chamber beneath the abandoned research station, watching data streams that revealed exactly how closely we had been studied. "What plans, Laura?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "What is humanity preparing to do?" She was silent for a long moment, studying me with an expression that carried none of the hatred or defiance I might have expected from an enemy soldier. Instead, I saw something closer to resignation, as though she understood, better than any of us, the full scope of what was coming, and found no satisfaction in it. "You believed you had won a war, Commander," she said finally, "but you were never fighting the whole of humanity." "You were fighting our patience, our willingness to lose battle after battle, while we prepared for something you were never meant to see coming. That patience has run its course. I am afraid, Commander Ordan, that what comes next will not resemble anything the Alliance has faced before, not in 30 years of war, not in the entire history of contact between our species." I sat with her words long after that conversation ended, long after Laura Whitfield was transferred beyond my authority and into the hands of Alliance intelligence, where I suspected she would offer no further information beyond what she had already chosen to share. I reported everything to High Command, every detail of the controlled withdrawal, the hidden evacuation, the months of patient observation that had left humanity with a complete understanding of our fleet's strengths and weaknesses. While we celebrated a victory that had never truly existed, I expected panic. I expected immediate, decisive action to prepare our defenses against whatever threat now loomed beyond our detection. Instead, I received caution, hesitation, and in some quarters, outright disbelief. The war had been declared over. Peace had been announced across every corner of Alliance space. Politicians who had built careers on the promise of humanity's defeat were unwilling to accept evidence that suggested otherwise, and military leaders who had spent 30 years fighting a costly, exhausting war were reluctant to sound an alarm that might reignite a conflict everyone desperately wanted to believe had ended. I understood their hesitation, even as it frustrated me beyond measure. After 30 years of loss, of grief, of sacrifice, on a scale that had touched nearly every family across the Alliance, the promise of peace was intoxicating. No one wanted to believe that promise was false. But I had looked into Laura Whitfield's eyes as she spoke of what was coming, and I had seen no deception there, only the quiet certainty of someone who understood, far better than any of us, exactly what humanity was capable of when patience finally gave way to action. Bram found me alone on the observation deck that evening, staring out at the vast, silent darkness of space, wondering how much of that darkness might already be hiding a fleet we had never detected, preparing for a return we were not ready to face. "They won't believe it," Bram said quietly, joining me at the viewport. "Not until it's happening in front of them." "I know," I said. "Then what do we do?" I turned to him, thinking of empty cities and hidden evacuations, and a young human officer who had surrendered not out of fear, but out of the calm certainty that her mission was already complete. "We prepare," I said. "Whether High Command believes us or not, we prepare our fleet for whatever comes next, because I do not believe, for even a moment, that Laura Whitfield was exaggerating the scale of what is coming. Bram nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the stars, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke, both lost in our own thoughts about a war we had believed was finished, and a homecoming that neither of us could yet imagine the true shape of. Little did I know, standing on that observation deck, that within days, I would witness firsthand exactly what a single human vessel was capable of, and that the true nightmare the galaxy feared was only just beginning to reveal itself. 5 days after Laura Whitfield's capture, High Command finally authorized what they termed a confirmation strike, a coordinated assault against the last known coordinates associated with human vessel activity, intended to either eliminate any remaining threat or prove, once and for all, that the concerns Bram and I had raised were unfounded. I argued against it. I stood before the Regional Command Council and explained, in as much detail as I could without revealing sources I had promised to protect, that a single human vessel had evaded an entire fleet formation for nearly 10 minutes before surrendering, that its technology and tactics exceeded anything in our threat assessments, and that a confirmation strike, launched without full understanding of what we were facing, risked catastrophic losses. I was overruled. The council had grown weary of uncertainty, weary of a peace that felt increasingly fragile, and they wanted answers more than they wanted caution. A strike group of 12 vessels, drawn from 3 different fleets and commanded by a capable but inexperienced officer named Edric Vantry, was assembled and dispatched toward the coordinates where Laura's vessel had first been detected weeks earlier. I was permitted to observe the operation remotely from my flagship, monitoring the strike group's progress through a secure tactical link, though I had no direct authority over the mission itself. Bram stood beside me on the bridge as the operation began, his expression carrying the same grim apprehension I felt building in my own chest. 12 ships, he said quietly, watching the tactical display. Against a single vessel, we could not even hold in place with an entire fleet formation. They believe the vessel was an anomaly, I said. A single scout, unlikely to represent a genuine threat. They believe what they want to believe, Bram replied. I fear they are about to learn a very costly lesson about the difference between hope and reality. The strike group reached the target coordinates within 6 hours, spreading into a standard search pattern across the designated sector. For the first 2 hours, sensors reported nothing beyond empty space, and I began to wonder whether the human presence in this region had simply moved on, rendering the entire operation meaningless. Then, without warning, everything changed. "Contact," came the report from Commander Vantry's flagship, transmitted across the secure tactical channel. "Single vessel, human design, distance 6,000 kilometers, closing rapidly." I watched the tactical display with growing dread as a single marker appeared at the edge of the strike group's formation, moving with a speed that our sensor systems struggled to accurately track. Unlike the previous encounters, this vessel showed no hesitation, no pattern of observation followed by retreat. It moved directly toward the heart of the strike group's formation, weapons systems fully charged. "All ships, engage defensive protocols," Vantry ordered, his voice carrying the first hints of concern. "Concentrate fire on the approaching contact." What followed unfolded in less time than it takes to draw a single breath, and even now, reviewing the recorded tactical data from that engagement, I struggle to fully comprehend the precision of what I witnessed. The human vessel did not attempt to evade the strike group's defensive fire. Instead, it moved through the formation itself, weaving between vessels with a speed and precision that left our targeting systems unable to maintain accurate lock. As it passed within close range of each ship, it deployed what our analysts would later identify as a highly advanced disruption technology, disabling weapon systems, propulsion, and communication arrays with surgical precision, ship by ship, in less than 90 seconds. I watched in stunned silence as, one by one, the markers representing Commander Vantry's strike group flickered from active to disabled status, each vessel rendered helpless without a single hull breach, without a single casualty that our sensors could detect. It was not destruction in the way 30 years of war had taught us to understand it. It was something far more unsettling, a demonstration of overwhelming capability, delivered with what appeared to be deliberate restraint. "All 12 vessels disabled," Doran reported, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he could not fully believe the data displayed before him. No casualties detected, no hull damage beyond superficial. The human vessel has withdrawn from the sector. The bridge fell into stunned silence. I stood before the tactical display, watching the 12 disabled markers drift helplessly in the darkness where, moments before, a confident strike force had believed themselves capable of confirming or denying a threat they did not truly understand. Bram was the first to speak, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that filled the entire bridge. "They did not destroy them," he said. 12 ships, completely at their mercy, and they chose to disable, rather than destroy. "Why would they show restraint?" Petra asked, her voice unsteady. "They had every advantage. They could have ended 12 crews without any risk to themselves." I thought of Laura Whitfield, seated calmly in that interrogation room, speaking of patience and preparation, rather than hatred and revenge. I thought of an entire species that had chosen to vanish rather than fight a final, desperate battle they could have lost, patiently rebuilding in secret rather than lashing out in anger. "Because they are not trying to punish us," I said slowly, understanding dawning with a clarity that chilled me far more than outright aggression would have. "They are trying to send a message. They want us to understand exactly what they are capable of. Without giving us a reason to escalate a conflict they clearly believe they can end on their own terms." The recovery of Commander Vantry's strike group took nearly 18 hours, each vessel requiring extensive repair before it could return safely to Alliance territory. Miraculously, exactly as our sensors had indicated, not a single crew member had been harmed. The human vessel had disabled every ship with a precision that suggested not just superior technology, but a level of restraint and control that unsettled me more than any act of aggression could have. I traveled personally to debrief Commander Vantry upon the strike group's return, finding a man whose confidence had been thoroughly shaken by an encounter he had entered expecting an easy victory. "I have never seen anything like it, Commander Ordan," he told me, his hands trembling slightly as he recounted the engagement. "One ship, a single ship, against 12 of ours, and it moved through our formation as though we were standing still. I gave the order to concentrate fire, and by the time my gunners had even acquired a solid lock, half my fleet was already disabled." "Did you see the vessel clearly at any point?" I asked. "Any identifying markings, any indication of its origin beyond human design?" Vantry shook his head slowly. "It moved too quickly for visual confirmation, Commander. But before it withdrew, we received a single transmission, broadcast across every channel in the sector. I do not fully understand its meaning, but I believe you should hear it yourself." He played the recording for me, a brief audio transmission, clearly human in origin, carrying a calm, measured voice that I did not recognize, though its tone reminded me uncomfortably of Laura Whitfield's composure during her own captivity. "This is a demonstration," the voice said, "not an act of war. You have been shown restraint today because we have no wish to escalate what has already been a costly conflict for both our peoples. But know this, what you witnessed today represents the smallest fraction of what awaits, should the Alliance choose to test our patience further. We are not gone. We were never defeated. We are simply no longer willing to fight the war you believe you already won." The transmission ended, and I stood in silence for a long moment, absorbing the full weight of what I had just heard. Bram, standing beside me, closed his eyes briefly, as though confirming a fear he had carried since the earliest days of our investigation. "They are giving us a choice," I said finally. "Stand down, accept the reality of what has happened, or continue pushing toward a confrontation they have clearly already prepared for." "And if High Command refuses to accept that choice?" Vantry asked. I thought of the empty cities, the hidden evacuation, the months of patient observation that had left humanity with complete knowledge of our fleet's capabilities while we remained entirely blind to theirs. I thought of a single vessel disabling 12 ships without a single casualty, a demonstration of restraint that carried far more weight than any act of destruction could have. "Then I fear," I said quietly, "that we are about to learn exactly how costly our refusal to listen can be." I filed my report to High Command that same evening, including the recorded transmission and a detailed account of the engagement, along with my own strongest recommendation that the Alliance pursue immediate diplomatic contact rather than further military confrontation. I did not know, as I submitted that report, whether it would be received with the urgency I believed it deserved, or dismissed once again as the overcautious concerns of officers unwilling to accept a hard-won peace. I would not have to wait long for my answer. Within 48 hours, the entire galaxy would receive an answer of its own, delivered not through diplomatic channels or military reports, but through a single broadcast that would reach every corner of Alliance space simultaneously, leaving no doubt whatsoever about the true scope of what humanity had been preparing during their months of silence. The broadcast arrived precisely at the beginning of the ship's morning cycle, interrupting every communication channel across Alliance space at once, a feat that our own technical specialists later confirmed should have required access to infrastructure no single vessel could possibly control. I was on the bridge when it began, having barely slept in the 2 days since Commander Vantry's strike group had limped back into Alliance territory. Every screen aboard the Orient Vale flickered simultaneously, tactical displays and communication arrays alike, replaced by a single image, a woman standing before what appeared to be a command center of some kind, her posture calm and deliberate, her expression carrying neither malice nor triumph, only a steady, unwavering resolve. To the Threnai Alliance, and to every species who joined the coalition against Earth, she began, her voice carrying clearly across every channel simultaneously. My name is Charlotte Marrow, and I speak today as a representative of the reconstituted Earth Defense Fleet. I stood frozen at the tactical display, listening as her words spread across the entire bridge, every officer falling silent, every station momentarily forgotten in favor of the broadcast unfolding before us. 30 years ago, Charlotte continued, your coalition declared war against humanity, believing our species posed a threat too significant to be allowed to grow unchecked among the stars. For 30 years, we fought a war we did not choose, defending our right to exist against overwhelming numbers and superior resources. And 3 months ago, we made a choice that I understand many of you interpreted as surrender. The image shifted briefly, displaying what I recognized immediately as Earth, though the cities visible across its surface bore little resemblance to the empty ruins our survey teams had documented weeks earlier. Lights blazed across continents that should have been abandoned. Industry hummed with activity that should not have existed, and I understood, with a sinking certainty, exactly what Laura Whitfield had meant when she told me that empty was a matter of perspective. We did not surrender, Charlotte continued, her voice hardening slightly. We withdrew. We took our people, our industry, and our fleet, and we relocated to a location your intelligence services have never once detected, not during 30 years of war, and not during the months since your coalition began celebrating a victory that never truly occurred. I glanced at Bram, standing rigid beside me, his expression carrying the grim satisfaction of a man watching his worst fears finally confirmed beyond any possibility of doubt. During those months, Charlotte said, we did not rest. We rebuilt. We prepared. We studied every weakness your coalition demonstrated across 3 decades of conflict, and we constructed a fleet capable of ending this war on terms we find acceptable, rather than terms dictated by an alliance that has spent 30 years treating our survival as a problem to be solved through force. The image shifted again, and my breath caught in my chest as the display filled with row after row of vessels, more than I could easily count, their designs sleek and unfamiliar, nothing like the human fleet we had fought and ultimately believed we had defeated. Ship after ship, stretching across the display in formations that spoke of overwhelming numbers and coordinated precision. This is not a declaration of war, Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was revealing. We do not wish to continue a conflict that has already cost both our peoples far too much, but we will no longer accept a peace built on the false premise of our defeat. Our fleet is prepared, and it is moving, not toward conquest, but toward a demand for genuine negotiation, conducted between equals rather than victor and vanquished. The bridge remained utterly silent as Charlotte's broadcast continued, detailing the coordinates and timeline of the human fleet's approach toward Alliance territory, along with a formal request for diplomatic engagement, delivered with a clarity and confidence that left no room for doubt about the sincerity of the threat behind her words. You have 7 days, she said in closing, to prepare a diplomatic delegation authorized to negotiate genuine terms of peace between our peoples. Should the Alliance choose instead to prepare for further conflict, know that the demonstration your strike group witnessed 2 days ago represents only the smallest fraction of what our fleet is now capable of. We do not wish for further loss on either side, but we will not accept another 30 years of war, nor will we accept a peace built on deception. The choice, as it always has been, remains yours. The broadcast ended, and for a long moment, the bridge remained frozen in stunned silence, every officer processing the full weight of what we had just witnessed. Somewhere across the vastness of Alliance space, I knew that identical silence was likely unfolding on thousands of other bridges, in thousands of other command centers, as an entire coalition of species confronted the reality that the war they believed had ended 30 years of grief was, in truth, only just beginning to reveal its final chapter. "They're really coming," Petra said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and dawning fear. "An entire fleet, larger than anything we ever faced during the war itself." "They were never gone," Bram said, his gaze fixed on the now dark display where Charlotte's broadcast had played moments before. "They were simply waiting for the right moment to remind us of exactly what we chose to forget." I ordered immediate contact with High Command, though I suspected, even as I gave the order, that every fleet across the Alliance was likely attempting the same, flooding communication channels with reports and demands for guidance in the wake of a broadcast that had shattered 30 years of hard-won peace in a matter of minutes. The response, when it finally came, revealed exactly how deeply the broadcast had shaken the Alliance's leadership. Emergency councils were convened across every major fleet command, diplomatic advisors were summoned from every corner of Alliance space, and within hours, a fractured, chaotic debate began unfolding across every level of government and military command, with no clear consensus emerging about how best to respond. Some voices called for immediate, overwhelming military mobilization, determined to meet the returning human fleet with a force so massive that negotiation would become unnecessary. Others, Bram and myself included, argued forcefully for accepting Charlotte Marrow's offer of diplomatic engagement, recognizing that a species capable of the deception and preparation we had witnessed over the past months represented a threat no reasonable military strategy could hope to overcome through force alone. Still others, and their voices grew louder with each passing hour, argued that the entire broadcast might represent nothing more than an elaborate act of intimidation, a bluff intended to secure favorable terms without the resources or fleet strength necessary to truly back their demands. I found myself in the middle of this chaos, summoned once again before the Regional Command Council, this time to provide direct testimony regarding the engagement my fleet had witnessed and the credibility of the threat Charlotte Marrow's broadcast represented. "Commander Orden," Admiral Castell said, addressing me directly before a chamber filled with officers and diplomats alike, all watching me with expressions ranging from cautious hope to open skepticism. "You witnessed firsthand the capabilities demonstrated during the confirmation strike. In your professional assessment, does the fleet displayed in this broadcast represent a credible threat, or is it possible we are witnessing an elaborate deception?" I considered my answer carefully, thinking of Laura Whitfield's calm certainty, of a single vessel disabling 12 ships without a single casualty, of an entire species that had spent 30 years teaching the galaxy the danger of underestimating human patience and ingenuity. "Admiral," I said finally, "I have spent 30 years fighting humanity, and in all that time, I have never once known them to bluff. Every tactic, every strategy, every demonstration of force I have witnessed from this species has been backed by genuine capability, even when that capability seemed, at the time, impossible to believe. I do not believe this broadcast is any different." A murmur rippled through the chamber, and I watched several officers exchange uneasy glances, the weight of my testimony settling over a council already deeply divided about the correct course of action. "Then what do you recommend, Commander?" Admiral Castell asked. I thought of the 7 days Charlotte Marrow had offered, of a fleet already moving toward Alliance territory with a scale and confidence that suggested genuine, overwhelming strength rather than empty threat, and of an entire galaxy standing at a crossroads between renewed conflict and the possibility of a peace built on honesty rather than deception. "I recommend," I said, "that the Alliance accept the offer of diplomatic engagement immediately and without hesitation, not out of fear, though I will admit that fear plays some role in my recommendation, but out of the recognition that continued conflict against an adversary of this capability serves no purpose beyond further loss on both sides. We had 30 years to defeat humanity through force, Admiral, and we failed. I do not believe 7 more days will change that outcome. The council session continued for hours after my testimony, debate stretching late into the ship's night cycle, as officers and diplomats alike wrestled with a decision that would determine the fate of every species within the Alliance. I left that chamber uncertain whether my recommendation would ultimately be heeded, though I understood, with a growing certainty that settled deep in my chest, that regardless of the Council's final decision, the galaxy I had known for 30 years of war had already changed irrevocably. Somewhere beyond the edge of Alliance space, a fleet built in secret, prepared with a patience and precision that no coalition strategy had accounted for, was already moving toward us, carrying with it either the promise of a genuine and lasting peace or the fulfillment of every fear that Bram, Corwin, and I had carried since the moment Earth's home fleet fell silent in orbit around a homeworld that had never truly been abandoned at all. 7 days remained, and as I made my way back to my quarters that night, exhausted and uncertain, I found myself wondering, for the first time since the war began, whether humanity's true strength had never truly been their weapons or their tactics at all, but rather their unwavering refusal to accept any outcome other than the one they had decided, with quiet and patient determination, to build for themselves. The 7 days passed with an unbearable slowness, each hour stretching under the weight of uncertainty that hung over every fleet, every colony, and every command center across Alliance space. I spent much of that time preparing my own fleet, not for combat, but for whatever role we might be called upon to play in the negotiations that Admiral Castell's council had, after 2 full days of contentious debate, finally agreed to pursue. The decision had not come easily. I later learned that the vote within the regional council had been close, with a significant faction still pushing for military mobilization, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that such a course would likely end in disaster. It was, in the end, testimony from officers like myself and Bram, combined with a growing recognition among the Alliance's political leadership, that 30 years of war had already cost more than any coalition could afford to lose again, that tipped the balance toward diplomacy. On the morning of the 7th day, I stood once again on the bridge of the Orand Vale, watching the tactical display with a tension that had not eased since Charlotte Marrow's broadcast first shattered the fragile peace we had believed was real. My fleet, along with representatives from 6 other major Alliance commands, had been positioned at the designated coordinates for the promised arrival, a location on the far edge of contested territory that had once marked the boundary between human and Alliance space. "Commander, I'm reading multiple contacts," Doran announced, his voice tight with anticipation. Confirmed human design, approaching from the designated vector, exactly as the transmission indicated. I moved to the viewport, watching as the first vessels began to materialize against the darkness of space, distant points of light that grew steadily larger and more numerous with each passing minute. What emerged before us was unlike anything I had witnessed during 30 years of war against humanity, a fleet of such scale and sophistication that every officer on my bridge fell into stunned, reverent silence. Ship after ship emerged from the darkness, their formations precise and disciplined, moving with a coordinated grace that spoke of technology and training far beyond anything the Alliance had previously encountered. At the center of the formation, a single vessel, far larger than any of the others, held position, its design elegant, despite its clearly formidable capabilities, broadcasting a simple identification signal that named it as the flagship Ellen Marchetti, in honor, I would later learn, of one of the earliest architects of humanity's secret withdrawal and reconstruction. "How many ships, Doran?" I asked quietly, though some part of me already suspected the answer would be far greater than anything our intelligence assessments had prepared us for. "Sensors indicate over 400 vessels, Commander," he said, his voice carrying disbelief, even as he read the numbers directly from his console. "And that count is still rising as additional ships continue to arrive from deeper within the formation." I stared out at that fleet, understanding with absolute clarity exactly how thoroughly the Alliance had underestimated the species we believed we had defeated. 400 vessels, built in secret over the course of mere months. Following decades of a war we had believed humanity was slowly losing. It was not simply an impressive display of military strength. It was proof, undeniable and overwhelming, that everything Laura Whitfield and Charlotte Marrow had told us was true. The diplomatic delegation, carried aboard a heavily escorted transport vessel bearing representatives from across the Alliance, made contact with the human fleet within the hour, opening what would become weeks of careful, often tense negotiation between two civilizations that had spent 30 years locked in mutual destruction. I was not present for those early discussions, my role limited to providing military escort and security for the delegation, but I followed every development closely, understanding that the outcome of those negotiations would shape the future of the entire galaxy. What emerged over the following weeks was not the continuation of a war that had already claimed too many lives, but the beginning of something far more complex and, I would come to believe, far more valuable. Humanity did not demand submission or conquest. They demanded recognition, an acknowledgement that the war which had begun 30 years earlier had been built on assumptions and fears that no longer reflected reality, and a genuine partnership moving forward, built on mutual respect rather than dominance. I met Charlotte Marrow in person for the first time during the third week of negotiations, invited to a formal reception aboard the Ellen Marchetti, alongside senior officers from across the Alliance. She was younger than her broadcast had suggested, though her bearing carried the same quiet confidence and unwavering resolve that had first captured my attention weeks earlier. "Commander Ordan," she said, approaching me directly amid the formal gathering, extending a hand in greeting. "I understand you were among the first to recommend diplomatic engagement rather than continued conflict. I wanted to thank you personally." I accepted her handshake, studying her carefully, still struggling to reconcile the calm, measured woman before me with the overwhelming display of military strength that had accompanied her fleet's arrival. I simply understood, Charlotte, that continuing a war we had already lost, without realizing it, would have served no purpose beyond further loss on both sides, I said honestly. She smiled slightly, though her expression carried a weight of exhaustion that spoke to the true cost of what her species had endured over 30 years of conflict and secrecy. "We lost so much during this war, Commander, more than your intelligence services ever fully understood, I suspect. Our decision to withdraw, to rebuild in secret, was never about deception for its own sake. It was about survival, and about finding a way to end this conflict on terms that did not require the complete destruction of either of our peoples." "And now?" I asked. "What comes next, for humanity and for the Alliance?" Charlotte considered the question for a long moment, her gaze drifting toward the vast fleet visible beyond the reception hall's viewport. Hundreds of vessels representing months of secret labor and decades of patient preparation. "Now," she said finally, "we build something new. Not a peace, born from one side's total victory over the other, but a partnership built on the hard lesson that neither of our peoples can afford another 30 years like the ones we have already survived. I believe, Commander, that this galaxy is large enough for both our species to thrive, provided we are willing to finally see one another as equals, rather than adversaries to be defeated." I have thought often, in the years since that conversation, about the true nature of what humanity accomplished during those months of silence. They did not simply build a fleet capable of ending a war on their own terms. They demonstrated, with a patience and precision that no other species I have encountered could match, that strength does not always announce itself through immediate action. Sometimes, the most powerful moves are made in silence, built slowly and carefully, while an entire galaxy celebrates a victory that was never truly real. The war that had defined 30 years of my life, that had cost me my sister and countless friends and colleagues, ended not with a final, decisive battle, but with a negotiated peace that reshaped the balance of power across known space entirely. Humanity did not conquer the Alliance, nor did they seek to. They simply reminded us, in the most unforgettable way possible, exactly why they had earned their reputation as the single most formidable species the galaxy had ever encountered. I retired from active fleet command several years after those negotiations concluded, having witnessed firsthand the beginning of an era defined not by conflict, but by a cautious, evolving partnership between species. who had once believed each other's destruction was the only possible outcome of their encounter. Bram remained in service for several more years, eventually accepting a position advising the newly formed joint council between humanity and the Alliance, drawing on decades of hard-won experience to help guide a relationship that neither side fully trusted at first, but that grew, slowly and carefully, into something neither of us could have imagined during the darkest years of the war. I think often of Laura Whitfield, the calm, composed officer who surrendered not out of fear, but out of the quiet certainty that her mission had already succeeded. I think of the single vessel that disabled 12 ships without a single casualty, choosing restraint over destruction, even when overwhelming force was well within its grasp. And I think of Charlotte Marrow, standing before an entire galaxy, offering not conquest, but the possibility of a genuine and lasting peace, built on truth, rather than the comfortable lie of an easy victory. The galaxy believed, for a brief and painful moment, that humanity had finally fallen. I was there, standing on the bridge of my flagship, watching their fleet fall silent in orbit around a homeworld we believed had been secured. I understand now, with the clarity that only years of reflection can provide, that we never witnessed humanity's fall at all. We witnessed only the beginning of their true strength revealing itself, patient, deliberate, and ultimately unstoppable, in a way that no coalition, however vast or however determined, had ever truly been prepared to face. The nightmare the galaxy feared was never humanity's destruction. It was the moment we finally understood exactly what humanity was capable of, when given the time, the patience, and the resolve to prove, once and for all, that they had never truly been defeated at all.